Got to give a big shout out to Sheba Coffee and Tico. They keep us going through these deep dives,
Yeah.
fueled up. And today we are diving headfirst into the whole TikTok saga. Will it stay or will it go? We've got our Wikipedia deep dive on restrictions on TikTok in the United States. Plus, we've got some high schoolers' perspectives from the Center for Tomorrow's Leaders, weighing in on whether a ban is the right move or not. So you're prepping for a meeting, and this is going to be like the hot topic.
Absolutely. And you're going to have some serious knowledge bombs to drop by the end of this. Really understanding the nuances of both sides of the argument, and even being able to connect it back to some fascinating historical parallels.
Okay, so the Wikipedia article, it throws us way back to 2019. The U.S. Army and Navy were already banning TikTok from government devices. This was even before all the Trump drama, right?
Right. And it's interesting to see that early focus on government devices. The Department of Defense flagged it as a security risk, worried about user data being scooped up, and the potential for influence from the Chinese government.
So even those early days, those core concerns about data and foreign influence, they were simmering already.
Exactly. But things really went into overdrive when the Trump administration came onto the scene. Remember those executive orders in 2020? Trump went all in trying to force a sale of TikTok to a U.S. company. He saw it as this huge national security threat.
Yeah, it felt like the Wild West of tech policy back then. There were lawsuits flying left and right. Even Microsoft was snicking around, trying to buy TikTok's U.S. operations.
That whole saga was a real turning point. It wasn't just about data security anymore. It became almost symbolic of this bigger U.S.-China power struggle.
And it's wild how even though Biden revoked those Trump-era orders, he still ended up signing the No TikTok on Government Devices Act at the end of 2022. Seems like both sides of the aisle. They see TikTok as a potential problem.
It does transcend party lines, which I think tells us this isn't just political maneuvering. There's genuine concern there. And then things really ramped up. We saw that push for a nationwide ban in early 2023. And then the DOJ and the FBI really started digging into TikTok's operations.
Yeah, it felt like a snowball effect. More scrutiny, more restrictions, and then bam, we got PFACA in April 2024.
The Protecting Americans from Foreign Adversary-Controlled Applications Act. Not exactly a catchy name, but it basically set the stage for a potential full-on ban. Unless ByteDance, TikTok's parent company, says sayonara to its U.S. operations. And those mechanisms within PFACA, they're pretty powerful. It gives the government broad authority to restrict access to apps if there's deemed to be a national security risk.
So we're talking potential blocking of software updates, preventing app stores from carrying the app, even restricting financial transactions.
Right, and it's those financial restrictions that could really be the nail in the coffin. If TikTok can't process payments in the U.S., it's game over.
And as we're recording this, January 18th, 2025, that divestment deadline is just a few days away. Even the Supreme Court just weighed in, upholding the constitutionality of PFACA. So a ban seems more likely than ever.
Unless there's a last-minute Hail Mary sale. It's looking that way.
So let's shift gears a bit. The Wikipedia article gives us that historical backdrop. But what about the actual arguments for and against a ban? That's where a second source comes in, those high schoolers' essays. They give us a real on-the-ground perspective.
They do. And it's interesting to see how they grapple with those big questions, even before the situation got this intense.
Right, these essays are from June 2023. Let's start with Rihanna Joaquin's argument for a ban. She really zeroes in on the negative impact TikTok has on young people, right?
She does. She talks about the addictive nature of the app, the potential for dangerous trends, and that's a concern that resonates with a lot of parents and educators.
It's hard to argue with the fact that TikTok can be incredibly addictive. Those algorithms are designed to keep you scrolling.
Right. And Rihanna also brings up that security threat angle again, arguing that the Chinese government could use TikTok to gather data on U.S. citizens and even spread propaganda. She cites a few incidents where TikTok was accused of censoring content critical of the Chinese government, which really fuels that distrust.
Those are pretty serious allegations. But then we have Braden Jageling on the other side, who's completely against a ban. His essay, that's a great question. And Braden also argues that banning TikTok wouldn't even solve the problem of data privacy. He points out that other social media platforms collect similar data.
He's basically saying if we're worried about data privacy, we need to address the entire ecosystem, not just single out one app. He advocates for stricter data privacy regulations across the board, which is a pretty compelling argument.
Okay, so we've got these two very different perspectives, both with valid points. What stood out to you the most?
What strikes me is how both Rihanna and Braden, they tap into these deeper anxieties about the role of technology in our lives. Rihanna's concerns about addiction and harmful content. They reflect a fear of technology's negative influence, while Braden's defense of free speech and political engagement highlights the potential for technology to empower individuals. It's like this tug of war between the promise and peril of the digital age. And TikTok, with its massive reach and unique features, is right at the center of that struggle.
Exactly, and it's not just a theoretical debate anymore. We've seen real-world attempts to ban TikTok, like what happened in Montana.
Right. Montana was the first state to try to ban TikTok for everyone, not just government employees. That was back in May 2023.
What was interesting about that case was that it wasn't directly about national security. They focused more on concerns about user data and the potential for harm to minors.
They argued that TikTok's algorithms could be manipulating users, especially young people, and that the app wasn't doing enough to protect children from predators and harmful content. It was a really novel legal strategy, focusing on consumer protection rather than national security.
And it worked, at least initially. The ban was signed into law. But then, of course, the legal challenges started pouring in.
Content creators backed by TikTok itself sued, arguing that the ban violated their First Amendment rights. They said it was a thinly veiled attempt to censor speech and suppress a popular platform.
And a federal judge actually agreed with them, blocking the ban just last month. That was a huge win for TikTok, and a major setback for those who want to see it gone. But the fight's not over yet, right? Montana's appealing the ruling.
They are. And this case could very well end up in the Supreme Court. If that happens, the implications could be huge. We could see a national precedent being set, either upholding states' rights to regulate social media or reaffirming the broad protections of the First Amendment in the digital realm.
It's a bit unsettling to think that the fate of a platform like TikTok, with over 150 million users in the U.S. alone, could hinge on a single court decision.
It speaks to the power of the courts in shaping the future of technology and the internet. And Montana is just the tip of the iceberg. If their ban is upheld, it could embolden other states and even the federal government to pursue similar bans on other platforms.
So even if TikTok survives this current round, it seems like the battle lines are being drawn for a much larger war over the control and regulation of social media.
Absolutely. And it's not just about individual apps anymore. It's about the broader tension between governments trying to assert control over the digital space and tech companies fighting to maintain their autonomy.
And in the middle of all this, you have users like those high schoolers in our second source, trying to make sense of it all.
Right. They're the ones who are most directly impacted by these decisions, yet they often have the least amount of say in the matter.
The Wikipedia article also mentioned that TikTok's popularity hasn't really dipped, despite all this drama. In fact, some advertisers are even spending more on the platform.
It's almost like a defiant act of consumption. Users are clinging to TikTok even tighter, knowing that it might disappear. And for advertisers, that massive user base is just too tempting to ignore, even with the legal clouds hanging overhead.
It highlights the disconnect between the political and cultural realities. While governments are debating bans and restrictions, millions of people are still using TikTok to connect, create, and build communities.
It underscores the fact that technology often moves faster than the law. By the time regulations catch up, the landscape has already shifted.
Speaking of shifting landscapes, the Wikipedia article touched on this idea of a mass migration to other platforms. If TikTok does get banned, do you think that's a real possibility?
I think it's inevitable. Users will always seek out alternatives if their preferred platform is taken away. The question is, where will they go?
The article specifically mentioned a Chinese app called Xiaohongshu, or RED, as a potential successor. It's supposedly gaining traction among younger users in the U.S., which is ironic considering the whole concern about TikTok being a Chinese company.
It is ironic, but it also suggests that users are less concerned about the nationality of the app and more interested in finding a platform that meets their needs.
So it's not necessarily about China or data privacy. It's about having a space to express themselves, connect with others, and be entertained.
Exactly. And that raises a crucial question. If other social media platforms collect similar data, is banning TikTok really about security? Or is something else at play? Is it about protecting American tech companies from competition? Or is it about containing China's influence more broadly?
That's a really important point. If it's truly about data security, then a targeted ban on TikTok seems like a band-aid solution.
It does. A more comprehensive approach would involve enacting stricter data privacy laws that apply to all social media companies, regardless of their country of origin.
And that brings us back to those broader questions about the balance of power between governments and tech giants, the future of online freedom, and the role of technology in our lives.
These are complex issues with no easy answers, but by understanding the nuances of the TikTok debate, We can start to grapple with these larger questions in a more informed and thoughtful way.
As of this recording, TikTok's fate in the U.S. is still up in the air. The divestment deadline is looming, and we don't know what will happen.
Will ByteDance sell? Will the U.S. government actually follow through with a ban? Or will some last-minute compromise emerge?
It's like a real-life cliffhanger.
It is, and it's a reminder that the relationship between technology and society is constantly evolving. What seems unthinkable today might become commonplace tomorrow.
So what does this mean for our listener as they head into that meeting? They're walking into a room where TikTok is the elephant in the room, right?
Right, but they're now armed with a deeper understanding of this complex issue.
They can explain the history of the restrictions, the key arguments on both sides, the legal battles, and even the potential emergence of new platforms. They can impress everyone with their knowledge of PFACA, the Montano case, and the rise of ROT.
But more importantly, they can engage in the discussion in a nuanced and informed way. Because this isn't just about TikTok. It's about the future of the internet, the balance of power between governments and tech companies, and the rights and freedoms of digital citizens.
And those are conversations worth having, no matter what happens to TikTok. As we're talking about all this, something from the Wikipedia article keeps popping back into my head. Remember how Wells Fargo banned TikTok from company devices back in 2020? And then New York City followed suit in 2023.
Yeah, it's a good point. It shows that this isn't just a federal government issue. Businesses and local governments are getting involved too. They're weighing the potential risks and making their own decisions about TikTok.
Yeah, it makes you wonder. Even if there isn't a nationwide ban, could we end up with this crazy patchwork of restrictions across different states and organizations? Imagine trying to use TikTok and you're constantly running into these digital walls, depending on where you are, where you work, or even what school you go to.
It would be a logistical nightmare for users and for TikTok itself. Trying to comply with a constantly shifting set of rules and regulations across different jurisdictions would be incredibly challenging.
Talk about a headache for everyone involved.
Right. It would also raise a whole host of questions about digital rights and freedoms. In a world where the online and offline are so intertwined, do you have a right to access certain platforms regardless of where you are? What happens when those rights clash with local laws or organizational policies?
It's a bit like the Wild West of digital governance. We're still figuring out the rules of the road.
We are. And the TikTok case is forcing us to confront some fundamental questions about how we balance individual liberty and collective security in the digital age. Where do we draw the line? Who gets to decide?
It's a lot to think about.
It is. But these are the kinds of conversations we need to be having. The TikTok saga is a microcosm of a much larger debate about the role of technology in our lives, the power of governments to regulate the digital space, and the rights and freedoms of digital citizens.
Okay, so to wrap things up, we've covered a lot of ground today. We started with the historical timeline, explored those key arguments for and against a ban, dove into the legal battles, and even glimpsed into a potential future without TikTok.
We saw how the seemingly simple question about a social media app taps into deep anxieties about data privacy, national security, freedom of speech, and even the future of the internet itself.
And as you head into that meeting, you're not just armed with facts and figures, you're equipped to engage in a thoughtful and informed discussion about one of the most pressing issues of our time.
Because this isn't just about TikTok, it's about shaping the digital world we want to live in.
And that's it for our deep dive into the TikTok saga. We hope you found it enlightening, engaging, and maybe even a little bit empowering.
Remember, the best deep dives are the ones that leave you with more questions than answers.
So keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.